Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It's Tuesday. It's not even Tuesday, it's Thursday. Happy Thursday. I'm so excited that you are joining me today for the Help My Child Has an Attitude webinar. We're going to have a really great time. We are going to learn a lot. We are going to grow a lot, hopefully. I hope the Lord blesses us, and no, the Lord will bless us, but I hope He gives you just that little tidbit that you're going to need today. So, as you're coming in, will you please introduce yourself? I want you to tell me just quickly where you're from and like what are your kids' ages, something like that. You don't have to give their social security numbers or anything. Just tell us like where you're from, what are your kids' ages, and we'll start there. I'm going to tell you that about me in case we haven't met, but I want you to do that in the comments for me, please, in the meantime, so I can get to know you. All right, so if you haven't met me, I am Kim with Not Consumed Ministries, and as you know, well, hopefully you know, we help families grow in faith so they can live not consumed by life. That's our mission, and we're here for you. We're really excited to be doing this with you today. I'm in Greenville, South Carolina, and I have 4 children that I homeschooled all the way through, 2 bonus children as well. And my kids are now almost grown. So we're on the other side of that with the baby at 15 and all the way up to 26. So we've run the gamut. We have survived the teen years. So if you're here at this event because you have teenagers and you're wondering, how in the world am I going to deal with this attitude? Don't worry, we've got you covered. We're going to talk about that. If you're here and you have a 6-year-old with an attitude, we're going to talk about that too. Sometimes it starts early, sometimes it starts later. It's really not a teen thing, actually. And to be honest, I found the teen years to be really, really sweet. Challenging in a different way, but really, really sweet. So I see you're coming in. Awesome. We have people from Mississippi, Corinna from Mississippi with 6, 4, 2, and a newborn. Aw, congratulations. California, 14, 13, 11, and 2. New York, 16 and 12. Ebony, welcome. We have from Windsor, I think, Massachusetts, 3 grandkids, ages 3, 6, and 8. Awesome. I'm seeing lots and lots of things come through. I love it. We have Laura has 2 kids from Maine, 10 and 7, and North Idaho, 9 and 7. Hannah, awesome. Welcome to you all. I'm going to put on the screen some slides for you. And as you're coming in, you can go ahead and keep telling me all about your families. I want to hear all about them for sure. So dump that in there. I see South Texas, Tennessee. Love it. Welcome to you all. I'm going to start the screen so you can see it, and we will go from there. So let's jump into my child. Help, my child has an attitude. Connecticut, love it, David, 2, 5, and 7, all boys. Lots of fun. I love my boys. I have 2 boys, 3 boys and 3 girls now, and they're all different. And what I find is it's not just girls versus boys. It's really just personality. And some of my girls have had personalities that are a little unexpected, and so my boys have as well. And just you never know, but a big adventure for sure, and that's awesome. Okay, let's roll with where we are here in our webinar. So I told you a little bit about my family. Here they are in pictures. And I did not mention the dogs and the cats. One of our dogs you can't see here because he probably was not jumping up right there, but we have 2 dogs and a cat, some horses, and all that fun stuff too. So, 2 of our kids are married. 1 is engaged. So we're moving on to grandparenthood and all that good stuff. So that's so fun. And I mentioned already, we are a homeschooling family. We've homeschooled all the way through. I graduated 3 kids in homeschool so far, with that one last baby, the 15-year-old, that we need to get finished in school. And we have loved that. It has been a blessing for us. So when you think about your kids and you think about talking to them. Perhaps you just wander into the kitchen in the morning and you meet a snarling child, teenager, maybe not even teenager, and you feel like, I didn't even talk to you. Why are we so mad? If this is you, I mean, you can be raising your hand over there. Just, I can't see it, but like, I know that you feel it. I know that you feel it. And sometimes we can't even figure out, like, where's this attitude even coming from? Like, they're mad and it's like the morning and I haven't even done anything to you yet today. How could you be mad at me? And that is just sometimes the way our kids start their day. And that can be very frustrating. So I want to challenge you to think a little bit about the backstory. So let me tell you this backstory. You see, we have a flat tire here. And the caption says, we all have flat tires every now and then. And it's true, right? And this is a picture of one of our flat tires, probably the most epic one I remember in our life. This particular scenario, we were moving. It was actually 2020. We're moving. At the time, I was still a single mom. As I already indicated, I got remarried in 2023, something like that. So here I am. I'm moving. I'm a single mom. It is moving day. The truck has arrived, and I am like ready to, move these things, except for I had sent my daughters, my two teenage daughters, over to get some donuts for breakfast because, we're moving. Our kitchen is torn apart and all this good stuff. So they drive over to get breakfast, donuts, and it's almost 30 minutes from our house. And they get a flat tire. They call me up and they're like, Mom, we have a flat tire. Now, of course, it's raining, as you can kind of see there in the picture. So they're stuck with a flat tire in the rain. I can't do anything about it because the movers have just arrived at the house. I can't really leave. I'm a single mom, remember? My whole family lives in Florida, so we're stuck. And in case that wasn't bad enough, at the time, I can't remember, teenage daughter, I can't remember exactly how old she was. She says, don't worry, Mom. I know a guy who can come rescue us. And I was like, hold up. No, you should not know any guys. What do you mean you know a guy who can come rescue you? It was the flat tire of all flat tires. Do you know what I mean? But seriously, there was only one thing I could do, and it was to let this friend rescue them, because here's the truth about flat tires. When you have a flat tire, you have to change it. You can't drive around on it for a few more days or weeks or months, because otherwise you're going to go nowhere. And that's the truth that we really want our kids to know when it comes to their attitudes. So a bad attitude is like a flat tire. You can't go anywhere until you change it. Yeah, write that down, take a screenshot, whatever you have to do, so your kids understand that it's this bad attitude is actually keeping you stuck here, and it's making it so that you're not gonna go where you want to go, no matter what you do, because of this attitude. That's one of the first steps in helping our kids to understand why we want to help them change this attitude, right? So before we get into the nitty-gritty of how we can do that and how we want to talk to them about this, I want to ask you this question. What do you think is the worst thing that your child could do? Yes, this is a trick question. Purposefully a trick question. Is it A, roll their eyes at you, B, not do what you told them to do, C, slam the door, or D, walk away from God? Well, I think we all know the answer. And if I hadn't put D in there, you probably would have picked one of the other ones, right? You probably would have picked the one that just really gets to you. But here's the thing. What really needs to get to us is the last one. So we need to be thinking not just about, okay, did they roll their eyes, but what does this mean? Where are they spiritually? And where's their heart? And what do I need to do about that, if anything? And so that's kind of where we're going to go today. That's our agenda. And I'm, by the way, I'm not suggesting that only D matters. It's actually quite the opposite. I do think those other three things really do matter when it comes to your children. Like, we don't want them to be doing any of those things. They're disrespectful. They are not pleasing to the Lord. They're not going to help you to have a good relationship. All of those things. That's problematic, right? But we want to make sure that those seemingly little things, that we notice that those seemingly little things, A, B, and C, they actually are the driving forces. They're the path to D, the worst thing. The heart attitude, the Bible says, directs your path. That's what we see. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here now in this. We're going to use this acronym, HEART, to help us to think about how we can respond to our kids, how we can react to them, how we can help them, with their attitude issues. And the first thing that we're going to do, without further ado, is the one that you don't want to do and the one that you think is completely counterproductive. Are you ready for it? H, hold your tongue. Now I know. This is probably really surprising, right? You did not expect that I was going to say this at all. But it is the first step. So let me tell you a story. You ever heard of Jacob his name's a tongue twister, poor guy, Dishazar? I don't know if you've ever heard his story, but he was a World War III. No, we're not there yet. He was a World War II Doolittle raider. And on April 1st of 1942, that's April Fool's Day. Anyway, 16 B-25 bombers were hoisted into the flight deck of the USS Hornet. So this is his mission, to bomb Japan. But he was unsuccessful because his fuel became empty and he was forced to land in enemy territory. Now, that was pretty sad because then he and 4 other pilots actually became imprisoned there in enemy territory in horrible conditions. Things that you and I could never even fathom. But Jacob was given a very special gift. He was awarded the opportunity to have the Bible and read it while he was there and imprisoned. And during that time, he gave his life to God. And this decision, of course, changed everything. I hope that's your testimony too. So here he is in prison, in the worst of situations. There's plenty of things to complain about, plenty of things to have a bad attitude about. And here's what he said upon being saved. Hunger, starvation, and a freezing cold prison cell no longer had horrors for me. Even death could hold no threat when I knew that God had saved me. Isn't that wild? I love how quickly he realized that these things actually aren't the most important thing, right? So he decided during that time to live out his newfound faith by changing his attitude towards a brutal prison guard that was in charge of him. So he would greet the guard with a smile, and he would even smile back when he would physically hurt him, all the things. Now, of course, the guard's actions were not right. And by doing these things, he was not saying that they were or anything like that. But what he was doing was helping to keep his attitude where it needed to be. And in the process, this impacted not just Jacob in a profound way, but when Jacob was released from prison, he wanted to come back to Japan to witness to those very people. And you see it right here in this picture. This very guard that was over him, he wanted to come back and witness to those people and tell them how God had worked through him, which I think is really cool, because here's the moral of the story. And I would love for you to share this with your kids, because this is a good one. He wouldn't have been able to share this if it hadn't been for his change, right? So he's in prison. He's acting like all the other prisoners when he's being mistreated. And then there's a change because he gives his life to God. And in that change, he was able to then talk to the guards, who were very curious about not just the fact that he changed, but also his attitude the way that he was different than other people, and that gave him the opportunity to talk to the guards and lots of other people in Japan, through mission work. I think that's really cool, and that's something we want to show our kids, because okay, so their bad attitude is not the same thing as Jacob and the mistreatment and all of that. But don't miss our point here. When we hold our tongue, we allow God to work through us in getting to our kids. And I think this is really important because we have the opportunity to really help our kids by living things out, by letting them see something different in us so that they can come to us. There's so much opportunity that we have there that we don't want to miss in the moment. And it's easy for us to retaliate with a bad attitude, or particularly getting angry, flying off the handle, whatever you want to call it, right? It's easy for us to do that. So before we talk about any other strategies that we need to do, the things that will actually get to the heart of our kids, we have to start here, because this is the foundation for us even being able to do that, just like it was for Jacob. So that's the first most important thing. So pause, pray, and be proactive. These are the things that I want you to do. Don't react, because when you react, you respond in ways that are going to hurt your relationship with your kids and your testimony. So do everything you can, anything possible, to be proactive with your kids instead. So just hold out a minute, take a pause, pray about this before you address your kids' behavior. I'm not saying you're not going to. Believe me, we're going to address it. But if we just react, we're probably not going to do it in the way that we want to. In fact, a friend of mine recently was talking about how she lost her mind because her kids took her hair dryer and she was late and she needed it and all of this. And, I was reminded of all the times that I have done crazy things like that. And I have yelled at my kids over things and responded in ways, especially to things that they've said or done that did not help the situation at all, did not make it better, and definitely hurt my testimony, right? So number one, we're going to for sure make sure that we pause, we pray, that we proactively look at like this whole situation, that we just step back before we do anything. So that's the H. H is hold. Here's a principle, by the way, I want to talk about. This is Paul David Tripp. If you've never read this book, go ahead and go buy it. I don't make any money off of it, but go to Amazon today, I guess, and buy this book. It's called Parenting, 14 Gospel Principles by Paul David Tripp. And it's one of the best parenting books that you'll ever read. I read it when my kids were adults, just about, and I wish that I had read it when they were 2. But the challenge that he gives you in this book is that you will not find, practical techniques. There's nothing in there that says things like, hey, when your child does this on the first time, you give them this time out. No, none of that stuff is there. Instead, you will find principles that help you to understand God's work in the process of parenting. So here's his quote that I love so much. God hasn't just sent you to do the work in the lives of your children. He will use the lives of your children to advance his work in you. Talk about a toe stepper, right? But it's true. So as you're struggling with your child who has a bad attitude, I want to encourage us to start right here at the beginning, thinking about, okay, what can I do? How can I hold my tongue? Is there anything I'm doing that the Lord is trying to teach me in this moment? Is there anything that I can do to step back? Is there a way I'm reacting? Like all of those things. Be thinking about those things now before we begin to do the next steps with our kids. So let's get to the next step. E, evaluate. So H was hold your tongue. E is evaluate. Now this is a step we often leave out. So it's pretty important to me that we do it. Let me give you an illustration for this one. Obviously, tea bags. You've probably made tea before, right? This is an illustration that I want you to give to your kids. Just literally do it with them. Yes, they've probably made tea. You're seeing tea. I mean, well, maybe not. It depends on how old they are. But we want to, make a hot cup of water, and then have some tea bags. Take that empty tea bag, shake it out, show them, nothing's coming out of this tea bag. Make sure it's one of the ones that doesn't, some of them are a little too loose, but most of them are like the ones here in the picture. You're like, shake it up. We're going to show them nothing's really coming out of this. But when I put the tea bag in the hot water, what happens? The tea seeps out of the bag, makes the water dirty. Well, not dirty, but it looks dirty. It's not really dirty. It's tea, right? This is a really important illustration that we want to help our kids to see. You maybe have even heard it before, but what is inside, and this is what the Bible says, by the way, comes out when you're in hot water, obviously not worded the same way in the Bible, but what's in our heart is going to come out. It's going to be the thing that actually surfaces. So as we begin to think about evaluating, we could do two things. One, we could teach our kids to start evaluating themselves, which I think is really important. But two, we need to be doing that as well. So if you have the right belief in your heart, your attitude it's going to be life-giving. It's going to be like the clear tea bag, the one that's not seeping out all over everything, right? Or the clear water, however you want to see it. But if not, the way that you act and think and speak is going to hurt everyone. It's going to muddy the water. It's going to seep out when things heat up. And we know things are going to heat up. That's one thing that sometimes we don't do our kids any favors on. So we don't help them to know how to react when things heat up, when conflict strikes. And by the way, that starts at home. So if your kids get into a fight, what is the first thing we do? We send them to their rooms. We're like, go to your room, whatever, separate. Okay, what did we teach them? Well, first of all, you don't have to love your sibling. You don't have to get along with them. You just need to get away from them. Well, that's not helping anything because that didn't fix any problems at all. That's just dealing with the situation, right? But that situation is going to come up and up and up and up and up because you've not fixed the relationship. So when you're thinking about when our kids go through hard things, when they have conflict and they have strife or whatever, we tend to take them out of the situation a little too early sometimes. We don't give them the opportunity to even understand, well, what is the right response? And as they get older, what happens is they start having all kinds of responses that are not right, not good, hurting everyone in their path, right? They're not thinking in all that stuff because we just keep taking them out of hard situations at the very beginning. So be careful about that too. Most importantly, the most important part of this evaluation is we want to seek to understand our kids. Now, you didn't expect me to say this either, but here we are. As you're looking at the situation, remember our first thing is we're going to hold our tongues. So as you're holding your tongue, stop. Just stop for a minute, think back, ask yourself these questions. Have I ever been here before? What are the underlying behaviors and attitudes behind this issue that my kids are having? Have I ever felt this way? What lies are my kids believing that are causing them to respond this way? We have to step, because we're not in the situation directly because we held our tongue, remember? So we're out of the situation, we're stopped, we're looking at the situation so we can help see what exactly is the underlying issue. Because when your kid has a bad attitude, 9 times out of 10, there's an underlying issue. Well, really, I think there is always an underlying issue. There's always something causing that underlying issue. Maybe it's that they're hormonal. And don't discount that, my friend. It's a big thing. Spoken from, old age. It's a big thing. And there's girl hormones, there's boy hormones. We often associate it with girls only. Boys, if you have younger boys and you haven't gotten there yet, boys can be some of the most emotional people ever in those teen years, especially. And I was always surprised by that. I was so surprised that they would, there were times when my boys would sit down at the table and just bust out in tears. And I'm like, what? It was just spaghetti. What happened? I don't even know. But they just, one little thing can totally, and oftentimes with boys, it can be anger or Tears. It can be like it can go one of two ways. It doesn't always. I find that most pick one or they don't pick it, but most either are more angry or more tearful. You never really know, but either way, it's actually being caused by physical stuff. Okay, we have to know that. We have to think that out. I'm not saying we have to make excuses for it. Don't worry. I promise we're not making excuses for it, but we do need to understand where it is. So, for example, especially if you're a woman, and I know many of you are. So, if you're a man, I'm so sorry that I'm going to talk about the thing that no men like to talk about. But let's talk about the womanly cycle, right? If you recognize to yourself, hey, it's that time of the month, right? Whatever. If you recognize that, sometimes that can pull you out of making really bad decisions, right? Like as an adult now, hopefully you can say to yourself, okay, I'm just feeling this way because of the timing, right? So, like, I'm gonna have a bowl of ice cream and go to bed. Forget this. I don't want whatever you do, right? That's we have kind of learned some ways to adapt that to that, and we've stepped back out of that. Hopefully, we've grown out of making excuses because we don't want to do that. But there's a difference between understanding the issue and making it an excuse for the issue. So step back and help your kids with this. Let me give you a little kid example. I cannot tell you the number of times I have seen a mother in the grocery store in the middle of the afternoon with a kid in a complete meltdown, like a toddler. Okay, so toddlers are supposed to take naps in the afternoon. I know some say that their kids don't, whatever, that's not the point of this. But the average toddler has a nap in the afternoon. If you disrupt that schedule because you just have to get something done and you say, whatever, yeah, he's just tired. Okay, but you've put him in a bad situation. You're the cause of the bad situation. And then we get mad at the kid and we want to punish the kid because they're exhausted and they're in a store and they need to be taking a nap, right? We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we're assessing the underlying behaviors and taking any credit for anything we can help with. Like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to come to the store during nap time anymore. I'm going to, even though it's more convenient, it's on the way, I'm going to make sure that this kid gets in bed where they need to be, right? Or also during dinner hour, another bad time to go to the store with toddlers. Like, just don't do it. Go first thing in the morning. You're going to find yourself in a way better situation because you've set your kids up for success instead of setting them up for failure. Obviously, from time to time, you can't do that, right? Same with, older kids in things. So if you homeschool, let your kids sleep late. Why not? There's nothing that says school has to start at a certain time. There's so much research that says that their bodies need extra sleep. And if you wake them up, you're going to end up with a snarling flat tire, okay? From the beginning. They're going to look like that poor that dog at the beginning is our dog Moses, right? They're going to look like that because it's morning and they're teenagers, their bodies are changing, they're growing. It's actually painful. It's physically painful for some kids to grow, and they're wrestling through that, right? So we need to make sure that we're setting them up for success. Let's give them extra time to sleep in the morning. Yes, that might mean they stay up later at night. That is kind of the way they do things. We just need to see if there's a way that we can seek to understand where they are, to see if we can get to the bottom of the issue. We want to do that as much as humanly possible because we can't help them if we don't do that. And when we want to help them to do that. So let's look at some of these different attitudes and ways that things that come from our hearts. So complaining, grumbling, anger, bitterness, desire and lust, unbelief, pride, fear, despair, division, all of these things are the bad attitudes that come from our heart. It is really important that you try to identify what that is as you are working with your child, because you need to know how to fight it. And you can't fight it if you don't actually know what it is. So identify, what is this feeling? And by the way, in teenagers, it's often unbelief. They don't believe what God says about them. They don't believe that, they're worth anything, like they deal with a lot of those kinds of feelings. And so unbelief is one that you're going to want to hit hard. That way we can fix it, which we're going to get to some of that in a minute. But these are the ones, these are the things, by the way, that Proverbs 4 says, and this Bible study that you see here on the screen, this is called Keep Thy Heart. And it's a study of Proverbs 4. And Proverbs 4 talks about these things getting into our hearts and how they're the enemy. They're going to crush us because they're going to cause us to sin. They're going to cause us to do all these things. And we do not want any of these things in there. So we want to make sure that we teach our kids what these things are, how to keep them out. This means we're going to spend time in the Word together, right? Very, very important that we do that. We try to make that easy for you, by the way, here at Not Consumed, if you're not familiar with us, by creating Bible studies like Keep Thy Heart and many, many others. But that is something that you've got to get into their hearts, because the underlying issue is always down in there. It's some heart thing. It's almost always one of these things you see on the screen, right? And so we have to battle it with the truth. The truth about, and I see Alicia mentioned, this is something that almost every parent on here with a teenager can mimic, that this is the truth. Like, our kids, they struggle with this. It is a hard thing. And in order to help them, we've got to give them the truth, because they're believing lies. And they might be believing a lie, and that's causing them to complain, right? What is that lie? Well, the lie is, I deserve this. I am, I'm better than this, whatever. I'm too good for this. Like, those are lies, because the Bible does not say that. Like, we think we deserve certain things, and the Bible's like, no, you actually deserve hell and death because you're a sinner. And that's what the Bible says. And so we don't deserve any type of privilege, but our kids think that they do. And that's what causes complaining, grumbling, a lot of these things, actually. But anyway, knowing what the Bible says about these things is going to be really, really important. And we're going to dig some more into this in just a minute. So we got to evaluate, what are these things? What are these enemies that our kids are fighting deep down in there, right? Because we need to know what they are in order to attack it. We can't just look at the problem and see, oh, they're slamming the door, that's the problem. No, the problem is down here. The problem is some other thing. And the slamming the door, or the rolling of the eyes, or the I didn't do what you told me to do, that is just a symptom of whatever's going on in here. By the way, if whatever's going on in here is because your life is in a stinky place, I feel for you, been there many, many times, but you need to recognize that too. So if your child is, if your family's going through a divorce, you're going through a major move, you lost a family member, like, these are huge things. I listed them off like they were no big deal, but they are huge, huge things. And you need to know that your child is suffering. They're struggling with that. And we need to be aware of that. And that is not an excuse for bad behavior. That is not an excuse for sin, but it is an understanding of where you're coming from. And we can work with that, right? We can't work with it if we don't understand where we're coming from or where it really is. So be honest with yourself about what's going on in your life too. If there's a major transition, if finances are tight, if there's a major health thing going on, a health crisis with you or your child, or even a sibling, sometimes can be really, really hard. When my son, my 15-year-old, when he was 6, he had a brain tumor. Technically, he still has a brain tumor. He's doing well. But he had a brain tumor. It had to be removed. He spent like a month in the hospital, 2.5 years in chemo, big, long thing. The person in our family who took it the hardest was one of his sisters. She really struggled. She struggled a lot with it. And there were a lot of interesting behaviors that came out of it. Be looking for stuff like that. And it was ironic that she struggled more. She seemingly struggled more with it than he did, especially at the time, because he was 6 and he was a little carefree about it. And so just always be looking for that kind of thing, because sometimes it's not directly on your child. It could even be something that their friend is struggling with, but they're hearing a lot, especially if they're very compassionate and empathetic children, and they really take on what other people are feeling, then they might really be taking that on for a friend. So you want to know that. By the way, here's your bonus tip of the day, which I don't remember what precious person told me to do this, but man, this is like worth gold. This was worth coming to the webinar for, friends. If you want to really know what your kids are thinking and what they're struggling with in their heart, and they're over like age 10, ask them how you can pray for them. And you'll be shocked when they say, well, my friend, blah, 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 can you pray for them? Now you know. Okay, so the reason he's struggling with this is because his friend is going through this. And I wouldn't have known that because they don't just tell you that. And if you ask them directly, what are you struggling with? They're not going to tell you either. You can try any kind of question you're thinking of, like anything you could think of. They will not be able to answer that question. I don't think they do it on purpose, but they just don't open up like that. But I have found that the key question, and by the way, you kind of have to do this at night privately. Don't do this in front of other people. But older kids like the nighttime. Bless us, because as we get older, we're like, it's 9 p.m. I'm exhausted. And they're like, what do you mean it's only 9 p.m.? I'm not going to bed till like 1. We need to have a 4-hour conversation right now. Like, please. Anyway, but that's parenting for you. And that's when we want to ask, when they're sitting there with you on the couch, wherever you like to hang out in the evenings, and you ask that question, how can I pray for you? It's not an accusatory question, and they will rise to answering it. And it's amazing. So do that. That will help you with this evaluate part. Now, okay, so we're going to hold our tongue. We're going to evaluate, and now we're going to apply grace. All things that you were hoping we wouldn't talk about when we came here, I think. But here we are talking about these things because they're actually really, really important. So here's another Paul David Tripp quote that I love. Your children need God's law, but you cannot ask the law to do what only grace can accomplish. So this is really important as we think about this, because I'm a rule follower. I'm a major rule follower. And I'm going to tell you that's been the hardest part for me of parenting, because not all my kids are rule followers. And by the way, I get along best with the kids that I have in my family that are rule followers. And the other kids will tell you that they're my favorite. That's not true. However, I tend to understand them really well because I'm a rule follower, and I understand, okay, we have our sins, don't worry, but rule following is not one of them, right? We do what we think is right, at least to other people in their face, right? Like, that's what a rule follower does. So, I spent a lot of my early years trying to make my kids follow the law, the rules, so that they could be good Christians as parent. I just have to admit that. And maybe you're there too. And I wish that I never had done that, because the truth is, law and grace can actually exist together. It's not one or the other. It's not like you have to toe the line in order to be a good Christian. That's not a thing. That's not Christianity, actually. In fact, law and grace have to exist together. Because if we want our kids to know God, we have to help them to see their need for him. We must show them that they can't live they can't live up to this law at all. They desperately need Jesus to cover them. That's what parenting is all about. So we got to show them, well, this is what God expects of us. This is what I expect of you as a parent. And what I'm supposed to expect of you. And by the way, you will never live up to this, because you cannot do it without Jesus. You need Jesus. That's the primary role of parenting. And the way that we can get to their hearts, by the way, the only way is to help them to see their need for Jesus. That's the only impact that we can really have. He does the rest of the work, which, by the way, hallelujah, because we can't do that. We would love to, but we cannot. So we need to rest in that. And by the way, it is an incredible privilege that we get to show kids Jesus's grace by modeling that in our parenting. We need to consider that. And, I'm telling you, this was a huge struggle for me, because I was very toe the line. You need to obey, you need to obey, you need to obey. And God very gently reminded me, hey, Kim, you don't obey all the time either. So how about we help your kids understand the difference, right? We need to help them to understand what happens when you don't do the right thing. And how does God feel about that? And not just me being worried about, I promise you, I'm being totally transparent here. It was all about the looks. I wanted my kids to look good. I wanted all the other parents to think that my kids were good Christians because they obeyed. And the truth is, that didn't matter at all, because what really matters is what was going on in their hearts. And I didn't realize that, because I thought real, it was all about, you just need to look like you're doing the right thing, right? Because that's what a rule follower thinks. So we want to be really, really careful as we're teaching our kids that. Grace in overalls looks like this. Let me show you what that looks like. I had an old pastor who used to say, let's put that in overalls. So that's what we're doing. What does grace look like? You seek to understand that. So we already talked about that. We talked about understanding what your kid's feeling. Why are they doing this? Have you ever been here? Can you relate to this feeling, right? That's the first step. Number two, we're going to walk alongside them in the mess. I cannot stress how important this is. We do not shame our kids and say, I cannot believe you did that. How embarrassing, how awful. Like, no, because God doesn't do that to us. That's not the way that we just don't respond to that. Nobody responds well to that. Instead, we want someone to say, you know what? I've messed up like that too. Think about you as an adult. How do you want people to respond to you when you mess up? This is it, right? You want them to come alongside you and say, you know what? I've been there. I have done that thing. I have felt that awful feeling. I'm going to help you. Let me come alongside you and I'm not even like, you have to make the decision for yourself to not do that anymore, but someone can walk alongside you, and we can do that as parents. We can walk alongside our kids and support them by first understanding them and relating to them in a way where they can feel like, okay, I'm not the only loser on earth that can never live up to this. By the way, if that is something that kids start to feel really guilty about, if you're very rule driven and you're like me and you're guilty of just being so rule following, focused on rule following, we can make it seem like to a kid who isn't a rule follower, which by the way is my number 2 and my number 3 kid. I got two for the price of one. Both of them are not rule followers. They're like, here's the line. I'm going to step right over that. and I noticed it from the very beginning of their life, right? And that was a huge challenge for me to understand. But what was even more convicting was when I understood that because they weren't rule followers, felt like there was no hope for them. Because they saw their sister who was all perfect, which she isn't, by the way, but she's a rule follower, so she looks perfect on the outside. And so the non-rule followers, the ones who slip up, at least publicly anyway, they really struggled with that because they didn't see a way out. And that's what we need to help them with. We want to help our kids figure out, how do we fix this? How do we move forward? And we can't do that if we're just shaming them and telling them, that's not acceptable. You should never do that. Like all these parenting things that our parents did back in the day, right? Like that, it just does not work. It's not going to help them at all. And again, I'm not saying we need to make excuses for them and just let them do whatever. We're not doing that. Well, obviously we're not doing that because we're sitting here on this webinar talking about how to help them out of this. But we also have to make sure that we are coming alongside them. And by the way, one of the ways that we do that is this. This is probably the most perfect example. I knew you'd roll your eyes. That's why I put it up here. And you see this giant sign, walk dog, clean your room, mom. This mom is working with the system, right? She's walking alongside this child, right? I'm being funny, obviously. Being funny. But I just want to remind you that if you're pushing your kids' buttons all the time, you're just making things worse. So anything we can do to work with them, work alongside them as they're thinking through this and dealing with this, it's going to go a long way. Maybe it's not putting a sign up on the ceiling, assuming that they're going to roll their eyes, but I think you get the idea, right? So, okay. Let's get to the next one because we're getting super practical here in just a second. All right. H, we're holding our tongue. E, we're going to evaluate what's going on in their hearts. A, apply grace. Not the iron fist, but grace. And then R, relate. So what does that look like? We ask that question. Have I ever been there? And we need to not just ask the question, but get in there and talk to our kids about it. Now, this gets a little bit tricky. We don't want to tell them every deepest, darkest sin. We don't want to give them any extra ideas for all the things that they could possibly do that they hadn't thought of, right? I'm not saying to do that. Don't tell them the messiest parts of your life, but if, let's say your child said something to a friend that they shouldn't have said, and that hurt their friendship, and they lost the friendship. Have you ever been there? I have. I mean, I think most people probably have. Unless maybe you're very quiet and you don't usually say anything anyway. But those of us talkative people, we say lots of stupid things. That's part of being talkative. So, helping them, and I don't even know that it mattered what I may have said to that friend. But if I remember it, it's worth sharing, just so they can really see, oh, I'm not the only person. I understand, like, mom understands me. And by the way, if you haven't figured this out yet, and those of you with younger kids, I'll just warn you now, you get less and less smart over the years. When your kids are really little, they think you know a lot of things. And then as you get older, and they get older, they think that you know nothing. The good news is they get a little bit older, and it doesn't usually take too terribly long. They get out there on their own, and they're very quickly like, you know a lot of things, Mom. I need some help. And so it's funny how that comes full circle. And we probably did that too, right? I know I did. But the point is, sometimes that happens because we keep everything covered, and we don't share things like that. We don't admit, I failed at that. And and this, by the way, is not a sin, but the most perfect example I can think of in this is having a quiet time. So I've always been really transparent with my kids about it, because I want to have a quiet time every day, and I don't. I do it a lot. Over the years, it's become more and more, but I don't do it every day. I just don't. Because there's no possible, sometimes I'm sick, sometimes, there's a baby and the baby is up all night, and sometimes, not anymore, of course, but, there's been over the years, all kinds of things that have kept me from doing what I want to do. And, but I've always been transparent about that. So in the mornings we get together, we have a morning meeting at the beginning of our homeschool day. And I ask the question, hey, what is God teaching you in your quiet time? And then the kids answer. And there have been times when I've had to say, I was sick, I was up all night, I didn't get to my quiet time, and admit that to my kids, which I don't like to do because I'm a rule follower, right? But I have done it. I have had to admit that to my kids, and I've had to tell them that, right? So years later, after admitting that, because I am trying to be honest with them, I'm trying to help them to know I have been here, I've been in this situation. Many years later, my oldest daughter got a dog, and it was her full responsibility. It was part of the package because I don't have time for that stuff. And so she gets this dog, and the dog is a puppy. And she comes to me one morning, like a week or so in, maybe it was 2 weeks, I don't remember exactly. And she's in complete tears. And she's like, Mom, the dog is ruining my relationship with Jesus. And I was like, what? How is that happening? And she's like, every morning he has to go out right away because he has to, he's a puppy. He's been, he's not able to hold it very long. And so he's got to get outside right away. And I go outside and I take him outside, and then everything is chaos from there. And I never get back to my quiet time. And I was like, oh, and I just had to laugh inside because I was like, this is training, my friend. You're going to be here again when you have a baby. And it's just going to happen. But here's the thing. She came to me for help because she knew that I wasn't going to come back to her with, well, I always get my quiet time done, so I don't know what your problem is, right? She knew that I was willing to admit that sometimes it's a struggle, right? And she knew that I would be able to say to her, well, let me tell you some things that I've tried in this time, in this type of moment, right? And so I was able to give her some strategies that would help her to get past the dog thing so that she could do what she wanted to do. Again, I'm not saying not doing your quiet time is a sin, but like a bad attitude or other things that our kids are dealing with. But it's a good example of how we can help our kids by helping them to understand that we are also not perfect, and we know it. And therefore, we do possibly have some ways that we can help them out with that. I used to joke and tell my kids that, I was a single mom for 13, 14 years. And I used to joke when they first started dating, and I would say, well, here's the relationship advice I can give you, who not to pick. But the truth is, when you have messed things up, or when you've made a bad choice on something, or when something has failed, we'll say, it's easier to see the ways that you can improve than if you've just always done it the right way, right? And so we want our kids to know that they can come to us and that we may have answers to help them. The second thing you really want to do here in this relate category is to ask yourself what might have helped you most in the moment. Sometimes we overparent, we just get in our kids' face and we're like, you need a hug. And sometimes that's not what we most need in the moment. Sometimes we need a few minutes by ourselves, right? And so I want to encourage you to think out, not just what would have helped you in the moment, because that's a really important question, but what's really going to help this kid in this moment? Are they the kind of kid who just needs me to sit? I have one kid who needs me to sit next to her and give her a hug and touch her and rub her back and, whatever when she's upset. And the other one of my girls would be horrified if I did that because she's not a toucher. She doesn't like that. And so I need to know that about my kids and figure out, like, how can I come alongside you and really help you with this based on your personality, my failures and the things that I know that I've done wrong in the past or struggled with in the past and what I would have wanted someone to do for me. And I know you have those things in your head. You're like, I wish someone had done that or taught me that or told me that, right? Step outside of the moment and outside of the, like, my kid is doing this thing and I want to, and say, what could have helped me when I was struggling with that or something similar? That's what we really want to do here so we can really help them and do the next thing, which is teach them. So teach. So we did first, we're going to hold our tongue, not forever. We're going to get in here. We're going to help them and we're finally getting there, but we've got to hold our tongue first, then, and stop and pause and pray and all that. Then we need to evaluate what the real problem is. We're going to apply the grace to it that God gives us, relate to our kids by really getting in there personally. And then last, we're going to teach. Now, teach is this is what Deuteronomy 6 tells us to do, right? We're supposed to teach. We're supposed to do it constantly, faithfully, consistently. In fact, this is one of the few directives in the Bible that are at parents, that are specifically things that God has told us to do as parents. And so we need to take that very seriously, but we have to be careful that we do it the right way. So let me give you a couple of things. The first thing to know is the secret to successful teaching is we have to get all of these things right. So we need the right timing, the right size, the right tools, and the right motive. Now let me help you dissect exactly what I mean by each of these. So right timing. Colossians 3:21 says, fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. So talking to teens should always be done in private. That's the right timing. Do not exasperate your children by doing this in front of everyone. It will not go well for anybody if you do that. I also would encourage you not to teach a lesson in the moment, especially if you're dealing with an angry kid. By the way, we have a Bible study on anger, just for you. But if that's what you're dealing with, man, you cannot handle this in the moment. You've got to wait, get out of the moment. They say hindsight's 20/20, right? It's a powerful tool. So let's wait until after it's over, and then we can go back. Unless you have a 2-year-old. Now, 2-year-olds, you have to handle things in the moment. But by the way, nothing I'm talking about today applies to a 2-year-old because all of this is about your heart, and we're not quite there yet. So now's a good time to say, really, we'll be quite there when we're about 6. And that's when this starts developing. So if you are a mama with kids that are under 6, kind of put this in your pin for later, right? Because the heart stuff is all stuff we have to wait until we can till they get to what we would call the moral age of reasoning, when they can start thinking about right and wrong and stuff like that. Before that, they're very concrete. You can't wait till later to deal with it. You got to deal with it right now. And they're very, it's very much in the moment is where they're living. But after that, kids can start living outside of that. So anyway, sorry, that was a little digression, but that's a part of the timing too, I think. Lastly, in this category, never say, I told you so. it's just not going to help you be a good parent. It's not going to help your relationship with your kids at all. It's just simply hurtful, and it just points out, it's like, rubbing salt in the wound, right? It's not going to help your kids, I promise. So skip that. They know you told them so. They remember the words in their head. So we can skip that, and that will help us a lot. Okay, the right size. I love this picture because it makes me laugh, but we do it. We do it all the time. We don't give our kids the right size intervention as we're teaching them, as we're giving consequences, and we're helping them to work through things. We will lump our kids together, like we walk into a situation and we lump everybody together, and everybody is equally punished, right? Don't do that. We don't ever want to do that. We want to treat each kid individually. First of all, we have to consider things like, what is the age of the kid? If you walk into a situation, let's say you walk into a situation and your 3-year-old is fighting with your 16-year-old, I sure hope that the consequence would not be the same for the two of them, because the 3-year-old cannot reason like a 16-year-old, and that's not the same level of offense, right? So we need to make sure that we're considering the age of the person that is the offender here, or that needs the teaching, or that has the attitude, right? What is the age? And what is their maturity? And what is the frequency of the offense too? So if we have a bad attitude one day, that's probably not, if that's what happened, that's probably not why you sat through this webinar, right? But if you have to look at how often this thing is happening to determine, well, what does the intervention need to look like? What kind of tools do I need, or what do I need to do? Okay. Obviously, and you know this, you catch more flies with honey, or more bees with honey, depending on how you like to say that. And really what I mean is, you can yell at your kid all day long, and you can tell them, get your shoes, hurry up, tie them faster. But it's going to happen 100 times faster if you just kneel down and you help them tie the shoe, right? This is just how it's going to happen. So we want to make sure that we're looking for ways that we can kneel down, we can help them to learn a faster way, instead of just yelling at them about getting it done. That's what I mean by the right size. So that's what we need to keep in mind. Next, tools, right tools. Now, you have a lot of great tools, and the number one tool that you have, I love this picture, by the way. Did you see this guy with the garden hedge and the lettuce? We do this as parents. We can be really guilty. You don't want that. We want the right tools for our kids, and we want to make sure that we're utilizing the things that God has given us. And the number one thing, by the way, is our relationship. So make sure that's first. Make sure we keep that at the top of the list always, which, by the way, means all the times that your kid, that you're not thinking about your kid's bad attitude, which could not be very many times right now, because it could be totally overwhelming you, right? But we have to be building a relationship in a positive way in all these other areas. And then we can come and pick on the one thing. But if we're constantly picking on all the things and we're not building the relationship in all the other areas, it's going to be bad. We're not going to have the kind of traction that we need. So your relationship is your number one tool with your children. So build the relationship by having family game nights, reading together, taking walks, doing anything that you can do to build the relationship. Remember, this is a relationship. It is not a dictatorship. So don't fall prey to I'm just here to make sure they do all the right things. No, we're here to shepherd them so that they love Jesus. So that requires a relationship. That's what Jesus modeled for us too, by the way. So that's what we need to be doing. Number 2 tool that you have is talking. And as you can see, I can talk forever, but that's a very important tool that you have. That's what Deuteronomy 6 tells us to do. So we do get to talk to our kids. Create a special time that you can meet with your kids regularly and study the Bible, especially if you have a child that you're really struggling with right now. Get them a Bible study, and the two of you, if it's let's say it's a teen, the two of you get together and have if you can sneak away, have a special lunch or a special dinner once a week, or just ice cream in the afternoon or something like that. Go away and focus on this solving this issue, and get a Bible study, do a book. It doesn't have, whatever. Do something like that so that you can really help build a relationship while you're talking about this thing. Number 4, help your kids pay it forward, or play it forward, not pay it forward. So this is a really crucial tool when it comes to parenting your kids. Help them to see, if I keep doing this thing, where does it lead? The best example is brushing your teeth. If I don't brush my teeth, and I continue to do that for, let's just say, for a week, then my friends are gonna start going, ugh, right? If that continues for like a month or 2, or maybe, I guess we'll say 6, because that's the timing, right? If that continues for 6 months and I don't brush my teeth, then I'm going to have cavities and I'm going to need to get a filling. If that continues for 6 years, then I always tell my boys, you might not even get married because, well, A, you don't have any teeth left because you've rotted them all out of your head, and B, you don't have any friends because your breath stinks, right? Okay, seriously, it's a silly example, but here's the truth. Like, we have to help them to see that things do have consequences, and they're not little things. Like, they keep going all the way. So I tell them, like, imagine it like a movie in your mind. How does this play out if we keep walking on this path? And what does that end up looking like? And so that's a really crucial tool for helping them think through things too. So, okay, let's move on to God's word. So, of course, we know God's word is our number 1 tool. And I want to give you some really important things, and that's how we're going to kind of wrap this up. And these are all going to be kind of quick, but I'm going to give you some really key things that typically cause attitude problems and a tool to fix it. So the first one is lack of motivation. Now, this is something that comes up a lot. And this is typically, they don't want to do anything, right? This comes from a lack of knowledge about obedience. Not like, oh, mom told you to do it, but a lack of knowledge of biblical obedience, what God says about obedience, and what God says we need to, the blessing of that is. So if you find yourself in a situation where you your child has a lack of motivation to do anything, that's what you really want to tackle, is the obedience issue. Get out the Bible. You can do it yourself if you want to. We do have tools to help you, but get out the Bible and study obedience to help with that lack of motivation. Okay, the next one is lack of vision. And believe it or not, this is kind of a big one, because kids don't understand where things lead and how things go. Like we were just talking about with the toothbrush example, right? We want to teach them to like ponder the path, basically, which is what Proverbs 4 says. Teach them to look at what happens if I keep doing this. Like, what is the long-term effect? Have people done this for, this one behavior? Have people done this forever? You can look at it with exercise. What happens if I exercise every day for a week? What happens if I exercise every day for 3 months? What happens if I exercise every day for 3 years? Like, we can track what has happened to people when they've done that. Like, we can look at examples of that, and that helps us to understand what happened on that path. Of course, we can do that the other way. What happens if I never exercise? Or what happens if I eat 100 Twinkies a day? I don't know, whatever. But help your kids to have the vision that they need to understand where the path leads and what those choices are. That's a very important thing that we want to do. Next, lack of confidence. Now, this one comes up a lot, and we talked about it already. Unbelief is really at the root of the lack of confidence. They feel like they don't fit in. They feel like they're not loved, which is crazy because we love them to death, but they still feel that way. So don't take it personally, by the way, it just happens. But the kids feel like they don't have what they need. They struggle with fear. They struggle with anxiety. We have to get to the root of God's love. That's really the key here. We need to teach them about God's love. People ask us all the time, especially at homeschool events and booths and stuff, they will come up. This is their number one thing, is I need my kid to have confidence. Do you have a Bible study on self-confidence? And I'm like, no, because you don't have any self-confidence, but you do have confidence in God, and we have extreme confidence in his love for us, and we need to know what his love for us is in order to be confident in who he made us to be. So, and then we need to understand who he made us to be, which is another thing. But this is the first step, is understanding who is God and how does that root me in knowing what I need to know. So that is so important. So make sure that you're teaching that. Next, self-control, lack of self-control. We know this is a big one. We know that, like, I don't know, probably every person on the planet struggles with this in some way. Maybe it's food, maybe it's too much social media, maybe it's running your mouth. I don't know, but we all have something. That's kind of our vice, right? We want to teach kids very specifically, of course, the armor of God. Now, I hesitate to tell you this because I think what happens is we go and we teach kids the armor of God, and we teach them this cute little Sunday school armor suit. Okay, cool, but that's not quite the thing. We need to teach them, what does this do for you? How do you fight sin and temptation with this tool that God gives you? So we really need to dig into that very specifically. This Bible study, by the way, is called Do Right, that you're seeing the pictures. This one is the next step after obedience. So if you obey, or if your kids are like, okay, I understand the foundation of obedience, I know why, I know how to obey, I know the blessing that it brings, but it's really hard. Now, if your kid is there, do not shame them, because that is true. I know I'm supposed to obey, but it's hard to do it. Why is it hard to do it? Because I have a flesh, and that flesh wants me to do the wrong thing. And all of us have different levels, and so we may not be able to relate to our child. Hopefully, we've learned today that we will try to do that, but we've got to give them a better tool. We have to help them to understand what it is that they need to use to fight this. And by the way, this Bible study, we have about 40 Bible studies. If you're not familiar with Not Consumed, we have quite a few. And this Bible study is by far the number one Bible study that parents will write to us about and say, we were doing this Bible study and my child made a salvation decision, a saving faith, profession of faith, whatever you want to call it. And when that first started happening, I thought, well, that's really strange, because I didn't write a Bible study with that intention. But then I went back and I realized that we tell the kids, you want to obey and you want to obey, but you can't do it without Jesus. You have to have his help. And if you're not saved, you don't get these tools. And so we realized that kids start to really see that practically when they're studying God's word like this. And we want them to know, oh, I see. In order to get self-control, I need these tools that only God can give me in his grace with the Holy Spirit through salvation. That's the only way I can do this. So that is, that's what we want, how we need to battle the lack of self-control. Okay, next, lack of spiritual maturity. So believe it or not, this comes up more than you would think. We have kids who are living, let's call it the cushy life. They've grown up in a Christian family. They don't do drugs. They know not to do the big no-nos, but they're not really acting like Christians because they're not growing spiritually. They're not getting any maturity there. Oftentimes it's because we haven't put in their hands the foundation that they need. They need to learn how to have their own quiet time. So we need to stop and teach them that, how to have your own quiet time, how to pray, how to study the Bible. All of those things are topics we need to be sure that we're getting at. Sometimes these are the things that cause attitude problems, is that lack of just maturity. And it's not like they don't know it, but they aren't really applying it because they're not really in the word, and they don't know how to be in the word for themselves. All they're really getting is somebody yapping at them, whether that's a pastor or a teacher in a Sunday school class, or it's even mom or dad, giving them little family devotions or whatever. But your child will never get the spiritual maturity they need from that. Neither will you, by the way, but that's another thing. We have to dig deeper. We have to get in the word for ourselves. We need our kids to understand how to do that. And so you got to tackle that with this Bible study is developing a quiet time, but there's actually an entire bundle called the Spiritual Disciplines Bundle, if that's where you're at, that you can grab. And again, you can do this yourself too. just to help make sure you're teaching your kids those skills, because they need those in order to keep growing. Next, lack of faith. This is kind of that unbelief thing, and it stems in a lot of different ways. It could be that they're struggling with things that are happening to them in life. It could be that this isn't the self-esteem thing, because we kind of talked about that earlier. This is more like, I'm afraid, I'm anxious, I don't, I don't know if I can trust God. And by the way, I think everybody on the planet has struggled with, I don't know if I can trust God. Can I trust God? How do I trust God? Like, these are things we need to be honest and say we've struggled with. Like, we had to figure out what to do. I know when my husband left and I had 4 kids under the age of 6, I had to figure that out. It was lip service before that. It was, oh, I trust God. And then when that happened, it was like, oh, I have to figure out now, what does that really mean? What does that look like in overalls, right? And the answer to that is helping kids to see God's character. That's what this Bible study is. You want to get into God's word and dig in and find out, what is the character of God that I need to be trusting. Because if you know he is good, and you know he is sovereign, and you know he is compassionate, you know he is just, you know he is sovereign, you know all these things, you're like, oh, okay, he can fix this problem because he's this. But if you don't know that he's these various things that we just talked about, like, if you don't know that, then he can't solve any problems. He can't actually, you can't trust him. So we have to know that. We have to know who he is. And by the way, just a quick tidbit about that. If you're struggling with a particular thing in that area, do like a very in-depth word study on that particular character trait. Like, sometimes we struggle with God's goodness. Go dig into that one, and really, especially if your child is older and struggling with something big, like, go through and do that word study, and go find out what all of, like, dig even deeper on God's goodness and how we see that. Because you can say that God is good, and you can read Romans 8:28, but when you go and you look at all of the ways that the Bible shows us that God is good, that is far more impactful than the one single verse that doesn't seem to make sense in times when things seem like they're a struggle, right? So, okay, now we have talked about a lot of things. We talked about the right timing, and making sure that when we're dealing with the attitudes, we're delivering things in the right time, privately, all of that stuff, in the right size that's appropriate for the measure of the child, where they're at spiritually, age-wise, and even in the offense. We talked about the right tools. And now I want to talk about the last thing that, maybe one of the most important things, and that is the right motive. So again, I go back to Paul David Tripp. God didn't give you your children to build your reputation, but to publicly proclaim his. That, my friends, is the right motive. So I want to challenge you as a parent, from one rule follower to potentially another, especially if that's something you're dealing with. We have to make sure that the goal is not our reputation, and it's not like us feeling like, I just need for my kids to look good. So, I want to look good, so I need my kids to do what they need to, whatever I'm expecting of them, right? Instead of building our reputation, we are raising kids who will publicly proclaim who Jesus is. And that is amazing. That's an amazing gift that we get to do. So be thinking about that as your motive. Make that your motive in all of this. Okay. By the way, I did want to let you know, last but not least, that you can grab the Heart Series bundle. That's the one that most closely deals with some of these attitude problems, from contentment to that study of Proverbs 4 that I mentioned, to doing right that we mentioned, that study as well. There's one on work, and there's one on your mouth, and really minding your mouth here. So a lot of those things are pretty attitude focused issues that you might be dealing with, and getting a bundle is a really great price. So I wanted to mention it before we close out here today. Friends, I am really glad that you came. If you have other questions or thoughts, things that come up here, please drop them in the comments. You can we would be happy to answer. I do see a question from Alicia asking about a Bible study on sexual purity. We do not actually deal with that topic directly. Proverbs 4, actually, the Keep Thy Heart Bible study does talk about purity, but it does not talk about purity in the sexual sense. It talks about purity in the global sense, which encompasses all things. But it's talking about purity of your eyes and your ears, the things that you're seeing and hearing, and things like that. So there's a little bit of that, but we do not currently have that resource available to you. So there's the answer to that question. For the rest of you, if you have any further questions, anything that you are struggling with or really wanting to put out here, please do that. Oh, I'm sorry. I see another question from Alicia. Thank you for asking that. She says, what about the struggles that your kids have had that you've never had? Your boys struggle with emotional rage and you've never had that struggle. Thank you for asking that question. I usually talk about this and I forgot. It is hard to understand sometimes when our kids are going through something that we really don't get. So the first thing I would say to you, Alicia, is if you could get dad to help with this, because he probably has, maybe he hasn't, but a lot of guys have been there, right? So if you have that as a possibility, I would go there first. And I would just tell him, hey, I'm struggling to understand them. Can you help me? And so it's not necessarily like passing the buck of I really need you to do this, although it could be appropriate for dad to step in too, but it's more appropriate for dad to help you understand where they're coming from and what that feeling is like. So I would ask for help. If you don't have that option, find someone. I have found people, like I said, I was a single mom for many, many years. So I would find people that seemed to have other issues. I would talk to, people at church or people in my, life type groups at night, on Wednesday night. I would ask people, hey, my kid is struggling with this. Do you have any resources on that? And sometimes I go, I struggled with that. And especially if you can find yourself, and I pray that you do, a church that is transparent and willing to learn and grow together, because that's really important. If you can find that, then people are often willing to just say, hey, I've struggled with that. Let me talk you through that. I actually sought out for my second child, because she's so different than me. She's a rule breaker and I'm a rule follower. And she would say now that she's a rule bender, because she is an adult and an amazing young lady. But it's still her personality when she sees a rule to think, it's my personality when I see a rule to think I got to follow that rule. And it doesn't matter what the rule is or how ridiculous it is. Like, I just immediately think you got to follow the rules. So anyway, but when I had such a hard time understanding her in so many different ways, I met someone at church that I was like, I think this person has a very similar personality. And I just asked them if I could have coffee with them. And I told them the truth. I was like, you seem to have a very similar personality to my child, and I really don't understand her. And I'm just hoping that you can help me. And she was so thrilled to do that. And she talked me through all kinds of different things, because she was very artistic and my daughter was very artistic. Like, they had very similar personalities. And I was so thankful that I did that. So that's another option, is maybe there's someone else in your life that you could come up with that might help you. And if not, maybe just try Google. Why is my child doing this? Like, what are some reasons why a kid might be doing this? Might help possibly too. So, okay, I think we're going to end there. Leave us some questions if you have any. We would love to see them. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for being a part of the Not Consumed family. We really appreciate you all. Bye for now.